In 1968, Pontiac sold more than 900,000 cars in America. It was the third best-selling brand in the country. 42 years later, at an assembly plant on Giddings Road in Lake Orion, Michigan, the last one rolled off the line with almost no ceremony at all. Pontiac did not die because customers stopped buying. It did not die because a Japanese competitor beat it on price. It died because in April of 2009, in a boardroom that had nothing to do with cars, a small group of people decided that the numbers on a spreadsheet mattered more than 83 years of American driving. The name survived on dealer paperwork for a few more months. The cars did not. And when one Pontiac dealer in Michigan tried to buy the brand and keep it alive, General Motors told him something that most people watching this video have never heard. Before we go inside that decision, if you are watching this on your phone right now, tap the like button on the screen. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to be told. To understand what General Motors erased in 2009, you have to understand what Pontiac had already become by 1968. Pontiac started life in 1926 as a companion make to Oakland, a side project inside Alfred Sloan's price ladder at General Motors. Within 2 years, it outsold its parent. By 1932, Oakland was gone, and Pontiac had taken its place, the only companion brand in GM history to outlive the division that created it. For the next 30 years, Pontiac was known for solid, conservative sedans, older buyers, nothing that would make a teenager turn his head. That changed in 1956 when Bunky Knudsen took over the division and told his team a sentence that would define the next 15 years. You can sell a young man's car to an old man. You cannot sell an old man's car to a young man. Knudsen brought in Pete Estes and a young engineer named John DeLorean. And in the spring of 1963, in a garage at the GM Proving Grounds in Milford, Michigan, DeLorean and two colleagues lifted a 1964 Tempest onto a lift and looked at the engine bay. One of them said it would take about 20 minutes to drop in a full-sized Pontiac V8. They tried it. It fit. It was against corporate policy. GM had a rule limiting mid-size cars to smaller engines. So DeLorean made the big engine an option package instead of the base and slipped it around the rule. They called it the GTO. GM executives told him it would sell 5,000 units if he was lucky. He sold more than 32,000 in the first year alone. If you were 17 years old in 1966, you already know how this ends. You already know the sound of that engine. You already know what the badge meant on a Friday night on Woodward Avenue in Detroit. 1968 was the peak. Pontiac sold more than 900,000 cars in a single year, third place in America behind only Chevrolet and Ford. The Firebird was 2 years old and climbing. Trans Am was coming. Smokey and the Bandit was still 9 years away, and it would only make the brand bigger. If your father drove a GTO on a Friday night on Woodward Avenue in 1968, you remember the sound before you remember the color. If you ever rode in the back seat of a Bonneville on a summer road trip, windows down, the radio loud, you already understand what this brand promised the people who bought it. It was not just a car. It was a specific feeling about what America could build and what it felt like to sit inside something that the country had made for you. Nobody at that moment could have told you that the same corporate structure that let DeLorean sneak the GTO through a loophole would, 40 years later, use a very different kind of loophole to erase the brand entirely. But that is exactly what happened. What killed Pontiac was not the 2008 crash. The crash just made the killing possible. By the early 80s, The same corporate logic that had built Pontiac started dismantling it. General Motors had discovered that if you built one car and put 4 different badges on it, you saved money on tooling. The Phoenix was a Chevy Citation with a different grille. The Sunbird was a Cavalier in different clothes. By the late 90s, half the Pontiac lineup was a rebadged version of something you could buy for less next door. The Excitement Division was still called the Excitement Division, but the cars underneath the badge were not exciting anymore. They were arithmetic. In 2004, GM closed Oldsmobile, a brand that had been building cars for more than a century. The man who signed that order was Rick Wagoner, GM's chief executive, a career finance executive who had spent 30 years rising through the company. He told close allies he never wanted to do it again. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, and GM went to Congress for loans to survive, Wagoner fought to protect every brand he had left. Pontiac was near the top of that list. It made money. It had loyal customers. He believed it could survive as a smaller, niche performance brand. He did not get the chance. Early in 2009, the Obama administration assembled a presidential task force to review GM's restructuring plan. Stephen Ratner, a private equity executive from New York who had never run a car company, led the review. He decided Wagoner's plan was not aggressive enough. His condition for further federal aid was that GM cut brands and cut fast. His reason, on paper, was sound. 4 GM divisions competing in the same market segments meant marketing costs roughly 4 times higher than Toyota's single-brand strategy. On a spreadsheet, that math was clean. On March 29th, the White House asked Wagoner to resign. He did that same afternoon. 26 days later, Fritz Henderson, his successor, announced that Pontiac would be discontinued entirely, not slimmed down, not spun off, erased. And this is where the story gets strange. In early May of 2009, a Pontiac dealer named Jim Waldron from Davison, Michigan, contacted General Motors with a written proposal. He had found the financing. He wanted to buy the Pontiac name, the logos, and a handful of the plants GM was about to close. He was going to keep building cars under the badge with the workers who had been building them all along. Saturn was already being sold to Roger Penske. Hummer was being sold to a Chinese buyer. Saab was in talks with a Dutch sports car company. Each of those brands would at least have a chance. Waldron assumed Pontiac would be the same. General Motors told him no. Pontiac, unlike the other 3, was not for sale at any price. Not we cannot find a buyer, not the numbers do not work. Simply, it is not for sale. General Motors would rather erase 83 years of American driving history than watch someone else carry the name. And so, on Pontiac, the answer was final. The people who paid for that decision were not in the boardroom. They were on the assembly line. At Orion Assembly on Giddings Road in Lake Orion, Michigan, 2,600 workers built the last Pontiac G6 sedan, a white 4-door that rolled off the line in early December of 2009 with no ceremony and no crowd. It now sits in a museum in Pontiac, Michigan, the city that gave the brand its name. At Pontiac East Assembly, 1,100 more workers finished their last shift on the 25th of November, 2009. At Pontiac Metal Stamping, another 1,100 were idled the following year. In Oakland County alone, 6,600 people lost their jobs because of the restructuring that killed the brand. Most of them found out the way anyone finds out anything now, from the evening news, not from the company that had employed them, in some cases, for 30 years. From inside the task force's briefing room, the math looked clean. Pontiac generated roughly 2% of General Motors' global revenue. Buick, its sibling brand, generated more than that in China alone. When the task force chose which American divisions to keep, the answer was not written in Detroit. It was written in Shanghai. On paper, that was rational. What the paper could not measure was what 6,600 people in one Michigan county lost when the arithmetic came due. We did not lose Pontiac to Toyota. We did not lose it to customers who stopped caring. We lost it to a task force that had never driven one, and to a math problem that valued a market on the other side of the world more than the market in Michigan that had built the brand from the beginning. Before we close, if this story found you, if you have been carrying a memory of one of these cars without quite knowing what to do with it, there are more stories like this one. Subscribe, and we will keep telling them. In January of 2026, a 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge convertible with the Ram Air 4 engine is going to cross the auction block at Kissimmee in Florida. It is one of 24 ever built with a 4-speed manual transmission. It is the only one of those 24 that still has its original matching numbers drivetrain. A comparable Judge convertible with an automatic transmission sold 3 years ago for $1.1 million. The people bidding on it were not alive in 1968. Some of them never saw one of these cars on the street, but they understand what the market has decided. What General Motors chose to erase in 2009 had a value the spreadsheet never tried to calculate. The collectors have done the math, the task force would not. What was killed had a price. It just was not payable in the currency Stephen Ratner used. Stand at 4,555 Giddings Road in Lake Orion, Michigan. Close your eyes. It is the summer of 1968. The shift whistle blows at 6 in the morning. The line is running one car every 54 seconds. The smell of hot metal and fresh lacquer hangs in the air. 2,600 people are on the floor, and every one of them knows how to build a Pontiac. The GTO is on the road. Woodward Avenue is loud. A whole generation is learning what horsepower feels like on the way to school. Now open your eyes. The plant is still there. The workers are not the same workers. The badge on the vehicles rolling off the line is not the Pontiac Arrowhead. It has not been that badge at that address for 16 years. Every American brand had a last model year. This was Pontiac's.